A very warm welcome to everyone to the HLS Partnership Forum 2021, Advancing NDC Implementation and Strengthening Long-Term Strategies. Today is our fourth day of the forum, and today's session is dedicated to fund mobilization for subnational climate action. And this is the second in the series where in the morning we had a discussion on national government's initiatives to support subnational climate action. So we heard from the governments of Nepal, the South Korea, Vietnam, and Bangladesh on how they're encouraging subnational entities to and enabling subnational entities to take forward climate action at the provincial level as well as at the local level. But now in this particular session, we would like to focus on financing. We know that cities are a key constituent when it comes to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. More than 65% of global emissions are from urban centers. And this then gives us an opportunity, but also a great responsibility to reduce emissions. But that is a tall task for subnational entities, and this is not possible without support that is coming in both in terms of policy and regulation, but also in terms of finance. So given this background, today we would like to dedicate this session to financing subnational climate action. And if I can just have the slide on the housekeeping, yes, please. So just before we get into the actual formal session, just a note to everyone, while this session is in English, there is interpretation that's available in the Bahasa Indonesian language. We encourage all participants to type in their question and answers in the Q&A box. And when the Q&A session is open, if you'd like to speak out your question, kindly use the raise the hand icon, and request all speakers to keep your videos on, but your mics off when you're not speaking. And to let everyone know, participants are joining us today through the Zoom platform, but also from the VOVA platform. So we have a split of participants here and there. And those of you who are joining from the VOVA platform, we would request you to add sessions from the larger session agenda into your own login, and so that they become the sessions that you are able to then view and attend directly from the platform. So this said on the housekeeping rules, the flow of the session today, I will be inviting very shortly Dr. Esther Mogiorsi from the ICLEI World Secretariat. She is the head of innovative finance from the ICLEI World Secretariat in Bonn. And Dr. Esther would then be setting the scene for the entire session today, and would then invite our panelists. We have 4 panelists today from GIZ Indonesia, from the Republic of Korea, from IFC, from ICLEI World Secretariat, our colleague Rohit Sen, and also from the CCFLA. So sorry, that is 5 panelists today on the panel discussion. And to take this forward, I would now request Dr. Esther to kindly take over, and the floor is yours, Esther. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored to be the moderator of this very important session, and I'm pretty sure that together, we can really mobilize the necessary financing needed for local climate actions. So just to set the scene a bit, I don't want to take too much time from our panelists. I would like to point out the needs. And the next slide, please. And also the problem what we are facing at. So as we all know, the local and regional governments are in the front line of climate action. Still, what we see that there is a huge gap between the availability and the accessibility of the finance. So what we see is that 93 trillion US dollar will be needed for investments if we want to reach the global goals by 2030. And the urban climate finance needs are estimated between 4.5 and 5.4 trillion US dollar per year. But what we see is that there is still approximately 1 trillion US dollar missing for urban investments every year. I believe that Laura from CCFLA Secretariat will give you a much deeper insight on those numbers based on the report which was just recently released. The next slide, please. So just to give a very quick overview on the sources of finance. So obviously we have two big groups, the public finance and the private finance sources. And here the size of the boxes doesn't mean any difference. So private finance can be as big or even bigger than public finance coming to local climate actions. So it's just really to give an overview on what are the main sources. So regarding public finance, we see the international financial institutions as very important actors, and also the UN climate funds, which are the Adaptation Fund, the GCF, the JEF funds. Then there are multi and bilateral financing sources. And then, of course, very importantly, there are national, regional, and local financing sources. The next slide, please. What we see is really critical is project preparation and project development. So our experience shows that there is enough money available. It's just there is the lack of bankable projects that can access to that financing. And what we see is that in the project development here, if you look at this project development cycle, the very early stage project preparation is the most critical part, because no one is really interested in financing that one. Usually investors, financial institutions are ready in more mature projects, also large scale projects, but no one is really interested in financing enabling environment, the climate action planning and the project scoping phase. So this is where we really have to put more emphasis as we see it, how we finance that part, how we come through those three very, very critical stages. The next slide, please. So here I summarized based on our experience some bottlenecks, what we see the system, why is it so difficult for local and regional governments to access finance and to develop a bankable project. So very importantly, yeah, project preparation, I already mentioned, but we see there is a huge lack of fiscal and technical capacity. The electoral changes also don't help too much, because what we experience, particularly in emerging economies, when there is an electoral change coming, the whole city administration is changing. There is a very limited autonomy of local and regional governments. There is no direct access to those international funds I was just very briefly referred to in my previous slide. Engaging the private sector still is a kind of untapped potential. We also don't really know how to reach out to them for these local climate projects, but also their interest is very different in many cases, because they don't want to invest in too risky projects with a very low return of investment. And also the term of the interest is different, because private sector partners usually are interested in short-term profit revenues, while these local climate projects are usually very long-term investments. Then there is, of course, also difficulty meeting requirements, like the creditworthiness is a huge issue, like in the global south, like only 4% of the local governments is creditworthy. And co-financing, which is very much required for investments, it's also not possible for them. Then I already also mentioned the project preparation and the scale. So here, what we see is that financial institutions, investors, they are always more interested in the large-scale projects, but unfortunately, that's not reality. Most of local governments, also due to their capacity and fiscal autonomy, they have small-scale projects. So project aggregation and finding the solution here is also critical. And just to close it with some positive remarks on opportunities, what we see is that there is a growing trend of finance flows. There is also an increased recognition of the local and regional governments. There are also global initiatives supporting local and regional governments to access the finance for their local climate action. Here I just mentioned the CCFLA, the Global Covenant of Mayors, the GCOM. There are more and more project preparation facilities out there recognizing the importance of project preparation. And here I wanted to mention ICLEI's Transformative Actions Program, the TAP, which is kind of self-promotion a bit. I also put the website address on the bottom of this slide, where we just open a call actually next week. And yeah, with that, here I had some thoughts more. So also I wanted to speak about that there are more and more tools and knowledge products also freely available, as well as webinars coming out for targeting local and regional governments, that they can learn and understand better financing and help them with their project preparation. So with that, I would like to thank you, and also move to our panel discussion, where, as it was already said, we have 5 panelists today. So the first panelist is Laura Jungmann, who is a senior consultant at the Climate Policy Initiative, where she supports the work of the Cities Climate Finance Alliance. And Laura will give us some insights now on how CCFLA supports the city-level climate action, how cities could access funds from CCFLA, project preparation for accessing funds, and showcase successes and touch upon and lessons. So Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Esther. It's a great pleasure to be speaking at this event today. Good afternoon or good morning for everyone here. My name is Laura Jungmann. As Esther said, I'm a senior consultant at the Climate Policy Initiative, where I support the work of the Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance. So next slide, please. So since 2019, CPI has held the Secretariat for the Alliance. And so for those of you who are not familiar with the Alliance, it serves as the multi-level and multi-stakeholder coalition aimed at closing the investment gap for urban and subnational climate projects and infrastructure worldwide. So our members include more than 60 public and private financial institutions, including government and international organizations, NGOs, research groups, city networks, and representatives of some of the world's largest cities. And the Alliance, it acts in 2 main ways. First, as a platform for our members to exchange expertise in urban climate action, and also as a creator of knowledge in key areas in urban climate finance, so contributing with thought leadership and data to our members to do their work. So in the following slides, I'll present a few activities that we have led on recently and that also contribute towards mobilizing funds for subnational climate action. So first, just to give a quick glimpse of this report that was recently launched, which is the State of Cities Climate Finance Report 2021, in which we have done some tracking of some of the estimations of urban climate finance. So the first part of the report presents for the first time a comprehensive estimate of global urban climate finance. So it is really hard to change what we cannot measure. So the idea of this report is to really try to measure what are the climate finance flows. And the second part of the report analyzes enabling frameworks and also presents solutions for mobilizing climate finance for urban resilient development in cities. So I would like to highlight a few main findings of the report, as well as also provide some insights related to the Asia Pacific region. So next slide, please. So this slide that has a lot of information in that, and I would very much encourage all of you to take a look at our report if you have not done so. As I mentioned, so the first part of the report provides a comprehensive estimate of global urban climate finance and investment gaps. And we've done so by tracking sources of finance for climate adaptation and mitigation activities in different areas, but all of those that are related to urban areas or that activities that are directly affecting urban dwellers. So here we have included tracked data and estimated data from 2017 and 2018. And we have estimated a total of $384 billion that was invested in urban climate finance globally in this period. So this is far below the approximate 5 trillion needed annually that was also estimated in the previous City Climate Finance report that was published in 2015. So just to give you also an idea, in terms of sources of investment, our data shows a split of 60-40 in private and public sources in 2017 and 2018. So financing from national governments was the highest single contributor finance provider, driven by spending on transport and buildings, but also domestic private finance was also the main source of capital overall, which corresponds mostly to expenditure on private electric vehicles and energy efficiency in buildings. So this data, as I mentioned, for 17 and 18. Of course, we expect the pandemic, the COVID pandemic will affect these, but so hopefully we'll have also more data that we can compare the impact of the pandemic. But next slide, please. So just to talk a little bit about the geography. So of the total 384 billion, we actually found that the largest proportion of finance was invested in East Asian Pacific, mostly driven by China, but as well as in developed countries in Western Europe and North America. So financing for China features significantly in the capital expenditure, mostly for urban transport and buildings. But it's also important to emphasize that there was vastly insufficient amount of climate finance being invested in other crucial regions, so in other parts of Asia, especially South Asia, where we saw an annual average investment of $4 billion only. So next slide. So there is actually a significant investment opportunity in Asia Pacific for investment in urban climate finance. So according to the IFC, this region represents 60% of total investment opportunities in cities in emerging markets. So it's critical that the rapid urban population growth in the region, which has become majorly urban in 2019, is also accompanied by a low urban transition. So in blue here in this figure, you can see the current estimated urban climate flows, and in red, the annual private sector investment opportunity that was defined by the IFC, and the dotted line indicates the scale of the investment gap. Next slide. So just to conclude on this report, so cities are seen as enablers. So the cities, they have many roles that can be leveraged to mobilize urban climate finance, which are explored in this report, and especially in the second part of this report. And these roles, they can be categorized into city governments acting as providers of infrastructure and services, as well as so paying directly, but also cities can be stewards. So what they can, which is the part of what they can influence through regulation, through urban planning, through convening and championing of different initiatives. So this influencing role that cities have is where a lot of the opportunity lies to mobilize urban climate finance. Next slide. So I'm just going to touch upon very briefly on a few more initiatives that the Alliance had worked on in the past few years with its members. So first, other than the State of Cities report, there were other reports and knowledge products that aim at closing the gap and look into the subnational climate finance. So here on the screen, you can see a couple of examples of recently launched products that are focused on the role of National Development Bank in supporting subnational climate finance. So as we've seen in this report, domestic finance is key, and we expect that national development banks continues to become increasingly relevant. And for those of you interested, I invite you all to look into these resources that are available in our website in more detail. Next slide. So a couple more initiatives that I would like to highlight, specifically on project preparation, which is something that Esther brought up and is absolutely crucial, that as we can see from our work as well. So the Alliance has a project preparation action group, which is formed by different organizations, such as project preparation facilities that help cities with technical assistance and capacity development to prepare bankable projects in cities. So to help connect cities to project preparation opportunities, we launched the Green Finance Directory, which is an online resource aimed at helping subnational governments and stakeholders identifying project preparation facilities that can support them in developing green and resilient infrastructure. And we invite you all to check our directory at greencityfinance.org. This was a collaborative effort from the Project Preparation Action Group, and it was officially launched at Darren Cities last year. And now it is also translated in several languages. Next slide. So a couple of other relevant work that the Project Preparation Action Group has done recently that I would like to highlight. First of all, what the project preparation action group organized a harmonized application form for project preparation support. So applying for support for different project preparation can take a lot of time and resources for cities. Therefore, many of our members got together and created a harmonized process, a harmonized application form, so that it can help cities understand what are the relevant information that are sought for project support, and also reducing the time that they spend on project preparation and application process. And the second one is the forum that was recently organized in Mexico for subnational project preparation, organized by our partners at ICLI and FMDV. So acknowledging the need of a stronger focus on early stage project development, as mentioned by Esther already. The forum brought together different actors working on climate resilient and development of projects and investment in Mexico, including national authorities, PPFs, and others, to try to understand what are the main challenges and understand how these different parts of the chain can work together. And the Alliance is also looking at replicating this initiative and this structure with hopefully soon in Indonesia. And we're doing a scoping report, which is being prepared by our colleagues at ICLI, that try to look exactly at what is the context of Indonesia and can we replicate this forum there. So next slide. So just to conclude, preparing bankable projects and mobilizing climate finance at scale will require cities to fulfill this dual role that was mentioned as providers and stewards, to get the support of national government, but also they need the help of all the global community, nonprofit, city networks, and different financiers to make sure that that happens. So only with this wide collaboration, we can, one, increase the green share of existing finance in cities, two, increase the green pie by mobilizing new urban climate finance, and also three, strengthen the green impact of finance in cities, so particularly through the mainstreaming of climate action into urban and capital investment planning and decision making. So these city planning and climate action planning, they cannot be separate, they need to be one. So this is true in all geographies, and it's most certainly true in Asia, where the Alliance will continue to use its convening role to achieve this objective. So thank you very much, and back to you, Esther.
Thank you so much, Laura, for this really interesting presentation. And I also would like to encourage everyone to read the report, which was just recently released, and Laura quickly presented the findings. It's very interesting, and I really like that it shows the potential of cities to invest and mobilize the climate finance. Very interesting findings. And yeah, indeed, to get the support of national governments and finances is critical to achieve those goals. I found particularly interesting the slide on the investment opportunities and the actual investments, and that there is such a great, huge potential in Asia, East Asia and the Pacific, and then such a low in Africa. Maybe we can come back to that one later. But now, not to take too much time from the panelists, I would like to introduce our next panelist, Gangan Dirgantara, who is a senior advisor of climate change in GIZ Indonesia. And he has experience in managing projects in various fields: climate policy, sustainable public procurement, sustainable transport, local infrastructure development and financing, and municipal waste management. And now Mr. Dirgantara, apologies, will give us some insights on how a project preparation facility works. In this case, the facility initiative that supports subnational financing for climate actions in Indonesia. Mr. Dirgantara, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Esther. So in this session, I would like to share our experience in conducting a Felicity project, which stands for Financing Energy for Low Carbon Investment Cities Advisory Facility in Indonesia. Next slide, please. This project is funded by German Federal Ministry for Environment, Natural Conservation and Nuclear Safety, or BMU, and it is a global project that is implemented in Mexico, Brazil, Ecuador, and Indonesia. For this implementation, GIZ is supported by European Investment Bank, EIB. So the aim of this project is to make a low carbon infrastructure project in cities are bankable for international financing institution such as EIB. So we hope that with the capacity development we provide to the cities, we can connect the project preparation phase, the project preparation and the financing, long-term financing aspect. Next slide, please. So based on the project cycle, Felicity focus in the project feasibility, structuring, and preparation. And we believe that we will bridge the planning and the strategy development phase as well as the pre-feasibility phase with the transaction phase and further the implementation construction and operation of the project. Next slide, please. Yeah. So in Indonesia, next slide, please. So in Indonesia, the context of the project implementation are based on several reasons. First, in the sectoral wise, Felicity considers that transport and solid waste sector are priority infrastructure sectors, and it is in line with the national development plan of the Indonesian government. We select the public transportation sector as the project that we support for further project preparation. The second reason is there is a high interest of European Investment Bank in supporting and financing urban transport projects in Indonesia. And at the moment, there is an existing GIZ project who are working in urban transport sector, particularly in preparing feasibility study in 5 pilot cities and focus on the bus rapid transit system. It is the Sutrinama project and Indobus project, which are supported by NAMA facility and by SECO, Swiss Economic Cooperation. And the last but not least, we also consider the project promoters. So based on our opinion that there is a concrete interest and request from 2 cities, which are Metropolitan Makassar in Sulawesi and also from Batam city in Sumatra to be supported by Felicity. Next slide, please. In preparing the feasibility study, we Felicity cooperate with the Sutrinama and Indobus project, and we share responsibility in conducting feasibility study based on the some aspects that are presented on the screen. So the Sutrinama and Indobus project will work on BRT concept design, proposed BRT services, integrated transport system, ticket integration, non-motorized transport, parking, and multimodal concept, as well as climate action. Felicity will work specifically in institutional and legal feasibility, environmental and social impact assessment, economic analysis, financial analysis, and procurement. While for bus technology and total cost of ownership, as well as for risk, legal, and implementation plan is conducted jointly among the projects. Next slide, please. One more slide. Thank you. So Felicity support the government of Indonesia and the subnational government to prepare and to select a possible financing scheme for infrastructure development. So it is in line with the government of Indonesian plan to implement a low carbon approach to infrastructure development project as committed in the national determined contribution and as part of the sustainable development goals. And following this, the government of Indonesia will intends to keep social economic improvement, maintaining sustainability and environmental quality, and also ensuring fairness and maintaining quality of life. However, as mentioned by Esther in the beginning, that the government of Indonesia also acknowledges a gap between funding needs and the availability. And to fill the gap, the government has introduced several initiatives to finance low carbon urban infrastructure, including with what we are doing now in Felicity. Next slide. Okay, so to fill the financing gap in infrastructure development, particularly at sub-national and city level, the government tried to mobilize various funding sources other than government budget. And these are 5 financing modalities based on the project feasibility study. And the first is if the project is economically feasible and financially not feasible, it can be the financing option is to the blue one is the construction, and the yellow box is the operation and maintenance. So for this kind of project, the financing option is constructed by the government and also operated by the government. For the project that economically feasible and financially not feasible, it can only it also can use the private investment for this, and government private investment for constructing, and the government for managing the project. For the project which are economically feasible and financially marginal, the government introduced the public-private partnership with the government support. For the project that economically feasible and financially feasible, of course, it can be operated and constructed by a private sector with B2B scheme or public-private partnership regular without government support. And for the project for economically feasible and also financially not feasible, it can the government also has another option, which is the assignment to the state-owned enterprises. Next slide, please. The government also consider the financing risk in infrastructure project. So as can be seen on the screen, that the risk the financial risk will increase during the project construction, and will then decrease again after the infrastructure constructed and in operational phase. So typically in construction phase, there are 3 risks, which are a delay and cost overrun in project execution, default and insolvency, as well as the issue in the permitting and land acquisition. While in operational phase, there are some risks, which are demand risk, tariff adjustment, political change, and contract default and force majeure. Next slide, please. For this, based on those evaluation, then the government come up with the innovative financing schemes in Indonesia for supporting the local infrastructure development. So first, using private sector for the project which are sorry. For the project which has high commercial rate, and the government also introduce and support the public-private partnership with risk sharing between the government contracting agency and private entity. And the government also provides some support, such as a viability gap fund, availability payment, and guarantee for private entities. The viability gap fund is the subsidies that provided to directly to the private entity. And that project can be prepared, solicited and unsolicited, prepared by the government or prepared by the private entity. And the third option is municipal bond. So the government also promote this kind, and the bond can be issued by the local government. But Indonesia still face many problems in supporting system for this context. And the fourth option is assignment to state-owned enterprise. So the government will ask state-owned enterprise to execute the project, to construct and to operate the project. And the other option is foreign loan with government guarantee. So in Indonesia, it can only be a national government loan. So the national government can then on grant or on lend this loan to the local government. Local government and state-owned enterprise can borrow money only via national government, and the lenders can be multilateral and bilateral development financial, DFI, and also other governments. And the last thing is municipal lending. For this municipal lending, the government established a state-owned enterprise, PT Sarana Multi Infrastructure, who create a municipal lending product. So the support and guarantee by the Ministry of Finance in low interest rate, guarantee for default payment of local government. So those are the six innovation in a financing scheme in Indonesia. With this, I give it again to Esther. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I found it extremely interesting and so much knowledge gathered through this project. I'm wondering if you will share it, if you plan to prepare a knowledge product or organize webinars, because particularly this knowledge, what you gathered on innovative financing schemes and how to define the right model for infrastructure financing, I think it's very, very valuable. I also like a lot the Felicity because it really shows a great example that although, the national government is playing a very important role and needed everywhere, but still how these different levels can work together and still achieving goals for subnational and local level. Also, the joint activities, what you just mentioned with the different other partners and the initiatives, I think Felicity is truly a great example for all. So now let's move from Indonesia to Korea, where our next speaker is Mr. Yojin Kim, who is the Managing Director and the founder of Solutions for Our Climate, a Seoul-based climate advocacy group that focuses on preventing the setting up of new coal power plants, both within Korea and internationally, phasing out of coal power within Korea and promotion of renewable energy. With this, I would like to give the floor to you, Mr. Kim.
Hi, hello. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction, Esther. It's a great pleasure to be speaking here today, and I'm very grateful to the organizers for inviting me today. I think my presentation will be kind of slightly different from what my two colleagues have presented just before me. In Korea, the need of subnational level financing for climate-related projects is less an issue. It's rather the other way around. What we see on the ground actually is happening. Despite living in a very centralized area where the role of the state government is national government is very strong, which is a prevailing feature in all of Asia, subnationals have been playing a very important role in changing our climate policy and eventually our finance sector as well. So that will be the focus of my discussion today. It will not be about procuring finance for some national level projects, slightly different. So that's what I would like to mention at the beginning. Today, my story will mainly focus about a province in Korea that has about half of Korea's coal power fleet. We have roughly 60 coal power units in the country. We're the seventh largest. I mean, we're probably seventh around, something like that. Largest. We have the seventh largest coal power fleet in the world. Germany, Japan are comparables to us. About half of that is in one province called Chungnam Province, and the amount of coal power plants there is about twice the size of Canada. It's just down Seoul, and the important feature is that it's the province in this red box here, and is that winds usually blow from China to Korea. That's coming in from the west, so the winds would bring in the pollutants coming from the coal power plants on the west coast to inland. So that's why there has been a very bad sentiment about air pollution in Korea. I mean, and coal power plants in this region have been contributing. I mean, air pollution is not appreciated by anybody in the country, but in the province, coal power plants have been the main target. And this has been provided a very good political ground, and especially with the rise of the climate movement for the provincial government to talk about coal. They've been very, very explicit about getting rid of coal in their province. However, the province has barely no authority over our power sector. I mean, just like probably in Indonesia, our Ministry of Energy practically has most of the authority relating to the operation of coal power plants. The ministry has very limited authority. However, the governor is an elected governor by 2 million constituents. The population of the province is 2 million. And he is exposed to air pollution. And saying something on coal does bring in votes. What happens when the two governments, when the two level of governments collide? Usually the typical answer would be the national government win, but in this case, no. The subnational government has been totally winning the argument. In 2019 alone, the government of Chungnam has been able to cancel or expedite many of the plans that the central government has made. Most notably, a lot of coal power. 4,000 megawatts is about the size of many a national level size of coal power fleet, and because of the government's effort, the provincial government's efforts, a lot of coal power plants have been, retrofits or life extension projects of these coal power plants have been canceled. They've been expediting the closure of coal power plants, and this has become a narrative not just in the province but spreading around in the country. And this, because of this effort and all kinds of other efforts, bottom-up climate movements, coal power definitely here is not appreciated. It's opposed by both the conservatives and the progressives. And in that process, Chungnam province has shown a lot of global leadership by, for example, joining government political alliances. For example, the Powering Past Coal Alliance is one of the alliances that the Chungnam province has joined, and other national governments have been really, really supportive of that effort. Especially the UK or the Canadian governments have been very supportive of that effort. I will skip this slide because this seems to be a little bit technical. And because of these efforts, these rather bottom-up efforts coming from the subnational government, especially, I mentioned that the province has contributed to canceling a lot of retrofits of coal power projects, which has eventually capped the life period of coal power projects, and the government plans to operate coal power plants a lot more than 30 years. And because of that, our power plant has to change. Our government has been taking out coal power plants that should have existed in previous plans, but are not existing, but will not exist. And with that, phasing out of coal has become a more tangible and more realistic thing that our government can consider. And that has been reflected in our most recent power plan in late 2019 as well. And as I mentioned, and this effort has been spreading. The subnational efforts, the political voice against coal power that has happened, that has begun in Chungnam province has been spreading. I mentioned about the Powering Past Coal Alliance. Just to go back a little bit into that, it's a political alliance among national governments, subnational governments, and also some corporates, which have a certain level of commitment against coal. For national governments, it's going to be for national governments at the OECD level, it's going to be to commit to phase out coal in the 2030s, mainly in 2030 in principle. For a non-OECD country, it's around 2040 for that phase out. Our national government is not a member of the Powering Class Coal Alliance because becoming a member does symbolize a certain commitment to coal power, to not do coal power. But 8 of our provinces, which represent about 80% of our population, are members of the alliance, kind of representing the very general sentiment against coal. And as I mentioned, that a lot of that efforts have begun at the subnational level. Chungnam province has done it. And the financial sector is definitely not an area where a subnational government gets in. It's a very nationalized policy. I mean, it's a central government level policy. Financial regulations are, but the subnational governments are a big client to the financial government, to the financial sector in a certain way. Financial governments spend a lot of money per year. Education offices, school districts also spend a lot of money, several billion, tens of billions of dollars per year. And becoming a client of a subnational government is good business for the subnational and for the banks. And starting from Chungnam province and spreading to many other provinces is an effort to say that I will not accept you as our depository bank unless you have certain kind of coal policy. Unless you say no to coal, you are not going to be a candidate to be our depository bank. Something like that. Something like that has happened, and it's spread to most of the subnational governments and educational governments, municipal governments, regional governments, education offices in school district offices in Korea. And with that, it's been very explicit that banks have to have a coal policy. It wasn't just about this effort coming from the subnational level that has created this motivation for having a certain coal policy, but the reality, it was also all kinds of factors, all kinds of climate actions, discussions about our overseas coal finance that all contributed to our government having for our banking sector, our private banking sector, have introducing coal financing policies. But as of now, practically most of the banks in Korea have a certain kind of coal policy. For most of the banks, financing in new coal projects is prohibited. It's been difficult to count the number of banks that have a coal policy. We see about 100 financial institutions, including banks, pension funds, and insurance companies, have a certain kind of coal policy. And as I mentioned, the subnational government's contribution to that has been very significant. So this is what I have for today. Thank you very much once again for inviting me, and the floor is yours, Esther.
Thank you so much. I think it was very, very interesting that you brought in a completely different perspective, and that you showed us an example where some national level provinces are just so strong, even stronger in the decision making than the national government, which is, obviously you are not an emerging economy, but when we work with those countries, this is exactly the opposite. So it was, I think, very useful to get such an example. And also this alliance, where what you just showed, it's such a perfect example of the collaboration of the different level of governments. And now that you were just speaking about phasing out coal, it leads us to our next presenter, Rohit, who is a colleague of mine at the ICLEI World Secretariat and a senior expert in renewable energy technologies and project finance. Rohit coordinates and manages activities and projects related to renewable energy and climate action. And now he will present us the 100% Renewable Cities and Regions Roadmap project and how it supports the global transition to renewable energies. Rohit, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Esther, and thanks for the introduction. Also, thanks to the ALP Forum for having me here. I want to first set the scene or put a disclaimer that I want to talk about subnational governments' integration into climate action from a different approach. Take a step back and see when you want to bring in a program and bring in a transition, create bankable projects, and then reach the finance side of it. So I would, next slide, please. I always start with just setting the scene and see where the challenge is with the climate crisis, with the energy access and the limited natural resources. We already have people who are yet to be connected with clean energy access. There are cities who are consuming 65% of the global energy demand and 50% being wasted. At the same time, we have record high levels of CO2 emissions being emitted. So this is the scene. How do we address the challenge? There are many solutions. And one of the solutions, next slide please, is to get subnational governments driven into this energy transition. Cities and regions can lead this renewable energy transition with setting 100% renewable energy targets. Globally, already more than 350 plus cities have set targets around the world. Local governments are at the most unique position to implement such transitions by acting public policies which are focusing into, let's say, electric vehicles, putting into renewable energy targets for local setup, looking at building codes, looking at energy efficiency standards, looking at their district heating and cooling, and so on with power, heat, and so on. Next slide, please. With regards to this, we touch upon what actually drives subnational governments towards transitioning towards 100% renewables. I mean, number one, first, security of supply. Number two, reduction of CO2 emissions that can be looked at for climate protection. Generation of revenue from sales and export of renewable energy. Number four, looking at reducing and avoiding fossil fuel consumptions. Number five, create local jobs and stimulate the local economy based on this. And number six, support the achievement of national and international targets, which includes national level, national NDCs, SDGs, and so on. So looking at this, I want to also present to you what ICLA is doing and in the space of 100% renewable cities and regions. At the moment, we have 100% renewable cities and regions network, which is having cities around the world who are implementing the 100% renewables roadmaps. We have a project at the moment on which we are working on developing these cities and regions, taking them from the current status of renewable energy integration to 100% renewable energy integration, and something new that is coming up that we're going to also commit to an energy compact towards the UN Energies initiative in September. So I'll come to that. Can we go to the next slide, please? So first introducing the 100% Renewable Cities and Regions Roadmap project, which is funded by International Climate Initiative by the German government, BMU. We, in this project, look at 9 cities and regions across 3 countries, Argentina, Indonesia, and Kenya, and we are trying to develop their roadmaps for 100% renewable, and which can be further implemented into their local climate and energy action plan. While implementing these projects, we are also looking at that how we can enable the participation of local and regional governments in developing financially viable and bankable renewable energy projects. At the same time, we see that we touch upon the climate and energy targets, the NDCs, the SDGs that are at the local level as well as at the national level, support local policy development wherever new policies are required. We see what new policies can enhance and foster the transition with respect to energy security, improve energy efficiency, and also stimulate the local economy. And most important, multi-level governance dialogue is something that strengthens the capacities of the key stakeholders involved in this process. Next slide, please. Just to show how we are approaching, and we are going back to the drawing board and starting from the scratch to make sure that the end result, when we talk about financing, is where we have viable, financeable, bankable projects. So we start from the scratch with data collection on the ground, from resource measurements to and analyzing the demand from the current year based on past previous records of like 5-10 years, and how this would look in the future, let's say 2030, 2050, and so on. With that data collected, with the variations, with the scenarios, we do the energy modeling. Based on the energy modeling, we have certain scenarios that come up, which tells us which pathways can be taken or can be considered to build the roadmap based on various feasibility assessments with respect to technology, what kind of financing scenarios can be imagined, what kind of mechanisms can be built in, who could be the valuable stakeholders at local level, national level, as well as international level. And based on this, we come out with local strategies to implement with mechanisms and achieve 100% renewable energy transition. We'll also look at creating bankable projects, as I mentioned, and then connect these ready to implement financeable projects with either project preparation facilities at an early stage when and if required, depending on what technology and what situation of the project is needed, connected to various MFIs, development banks, impact investors, other private sector investors, and so on. Next slide, please. This is just to show you, I won't go into much detail of this, is a bit perhaps more technical, but this is just an example of a Sankey diagram for an energy systems modeling that we have done on, in our current work. This is looking at the modeling for West Nusa Tenggara province in Indonesia, where we can see that based on all the data, the analysis that we did at the baseline, and based on the modeling and assumptions and for the future, the resources that we use from wind to hydro to geothermal and so on to address each and every demand that we have taken in. And I want to mention, we went not just for government operations, but community or region wide, looking at all three sectors that includes electricity, heating, cooling, and transport, and tried to address over 24/7 period of time over years how each energy resource with storage included can be addressing the need of the local population, and that includes cooking. So we saw that this is possible. There are a lot of projects that can be envisaged here. Creating the bankability is the key, as Esther mentioned, as the other panelists mentioned, that developing those projects and creating a bunch of projects together will also attract all sort of investors, from the donors, the grant givers, to private sector investors. And this is the same that we also noticed with our energy modeling work and in the project, that similar scenarios are coming out also in Argentina and also in Kenya. Next slide, please. So something that we are also offering at ICLAI with the 100% Renewable Cities and Regions network is that where we are supporting local governments, local regional governments, subnational governments in transition towards renewable energy, where we pick up, support them through technical guidance, through capacity building, and also create opportunities for networking and peer learning opportunities so that the cities which are already in the lead, and perhaps some of them are halfway through in achieving the status for 100% renewables, and then go on achieving an overarching ambitions of net zero commitments and targets, they can already learn from the mistakes they did, do not have to reinvent the wheel, how the financing things works, what models work the best, was public-private partnership was there used, what other sorts of financing mechanisms were used. So very important, and this is where the cities which are now coming in, trying to create bankable projects, trying to get financing, trying to get access to technology, can learn a lot and achieve the target much faster, rather than getting stuck and making some similar mistakes. Can we go to the next slide, please? And here I just wanted to envisage and just wanted to say that ICLAI is also going in and has submitted an energy compact, which is called the 100% Renewable Cities and Regions Energy Compact. This is something that will be under the goal and ambition target of United Nations energy division, where they are looking at pushing their energy agenda, trying to address the SDG goals for 2030, focus on SDG 7, and also achieving national determined contributions for all member states, which includes not just the national governments, but also brings in subnational governments into the picture. And this is where I also welcome all subnational governments, cities, towns, and regions committed or implementing 100% renewable energy targets to become part of ICLAI's energy compact. And this is where, when we go to the next slide, we would support all subnational governments with planning roadmaps, with implementation mechanisms, how this can be integrated into their current climate action plans and net zero targets, look at various policy recommendations that would enable the space Vertical integration, very important, as a lot of people mentioned that national governments need to be involved in Indonesia, for example, and how national governments and local governments can work together at various levels to make the common goal more achievable. Peer exchange and with other leading cities, as I mentioned, and of course, training, capacity building with knowledge products and so on for technical and non-technical staff of the local and subnational governments. I stop here, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions, or else looking forward to the interesting discussions. Thank you, Esther. Back to you.
Thank you, Rohit, and also many thanks mentioning the questions. So I would like to encourage everybody to put questions also in the question pane, which we are now collecting. And we have one more speaker, but after that, we will have approximately 20 minutes for questions and answers. So already start to think about your questions, either write them in this question panel, or we can, of course, also, if you raise your hand, then unmute you, and then you can ask your question to the speakers. And so as I announced, we are now moving to our last speaker, Aurélie Chadron, who is the regional lead of Cities Asia and Pacific at the International Finance Corporation. Aurélie, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Esther, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here and to hear about all these different initiatives. I mean, I've learned a lot, and it's really a pleasure to share the floor with everyone. So I'll go very quickly on the intro. Maybe let's move to the next slide. So the International Finance Corporation is part of the World Bank Group. I can't see the slides moving. I don't know if you can see that.
We can see that.
Oh, you see the next slide? I only have the intro. Oh, now I'm back to you, Esther. Okay, but I can start without the slides because I think we're right on time. So we're part of the World Bank Group. The World Bank Group is already the biggest financier amongst the MLA of climate finance. And very recently, we've announced even bigger targets. Yeah, it seems to be working now. On the climate. So now at least 35% of all our investments will have to have a climate impact, which we're very happy about. The International Finance Corporation is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. So here you have all the 4 different arms of the World Bank Group. I know it's confusing us as well, but the IFC is really focusing on the private sector solutions. And just as a recap, so the World Bank Group, the main mission is to end extreme poverty and promote shared prosperity. And as part of that, I think we've really come quite a long way putting climate at the center of that. I think now there's a big recognition that climate is impacting the poorest people disproportionately, and if you know, we have to also help mitigate and prevent the climate impact. Yes, please move on to the next slide. Okay, so IFC, I won't dwell too much on this, but basically we're a long-term capital provider to private sector clients, but also to subnational governments, and I'll dwell a bit more on that later. And we have a lot of offices all across the world, 29 offices in 24 countries in Asia specifically. We have our headquarters in the US. So on the municipal sector specifically, it's a fairly new platform that we've developed. And the idea, I think, is a recognition that, as some of the speakers have said, that the cities have a crucial role to play in service delivery and helping people get out of poverty. And so we have a bit of a one-stop shop provider where we combine investment, but also advisory services and upstream. So again, we're working across the globe. In Asia, we've done a bit, but we really want to do a lot more. As I think Laura mentioned kindly, we've just we had a good report that showed that, you know, the climate battle is really going to be happening in Asia, and we really realized that I think cities in Asia will have to front the biggest challenges on climate. I've lost the slides again. I don't know if that's only me. Okay, so next slide, please. So very quickly on this one as well. So municipal finance business in IFC. So I think what I want to make sure I convey well is we are a bit of a different animal to the World Bank. So in IFC, we can only lend to cities and subnational governments without a sovereign guarantee. which means that we really have to analyze the creditworthiness of a city or a subnational government, and we are not asking for a government guarantee. So really the idea is to help cities access new pots of funds and be a bit more flexible and not rely so much on the sovereign government. We have done, as I said, quite a bit in other countries, in other regions. We've been very successful in that specific sector in Latin America, in the Caribbean, and also in ECA. And now we're really trying to expand in Asia. We have a new team now that's set up all across Asia. In terms of sectors, I have a slide on this, but we are multi-sectorial. But as you can see on the left side, traditionally, we've done a lot of transport, so urban transport, trying to kind of shift the old buses to cleaner buses. But water and waste is also a big part of our portfolio, as well as health and education. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think this is an important slide, which shows basically the whole range of things we can do through the cities platform in IFC. So first, on the right-hand side, in terms of clients, as I mentioned, we can, of course, work with cities, subnational government. We can also work with municipal-owned service entities, and that's typically the way, for example, for water projects, we work with the subnational water authority. We can also work with some SOEs, not all of them. We have quite a specific requirements for that. And also sometimes we work with banks and financial intermediaries because in some countries we are not allowed to lend directly to cities without a sovereign guarantee. I think Gangan is nodding his head, but Indonesia is one of them. And so we're exploring ways to help banks lend more to cities by providing them with guarantees or other ways to support that. And of course, we can also work on PPP. So we have a specific team looking at this to really bring some private sector solutions to cities. In terms of sectors, oh, sorry, too fast. In terms of sector, as I said, we cover almost all of the urban sector. Traditionally, lots of transport, but now, especially in Asia, we have a big emphasis on handling marine plastics. So waste is becoming a topic more kind of at the forefront, I think, especially with COVID. Water, wastewater, and now non-revenue water is also becoming an interesting theme, as well as energy efficiency, smart cities, street lighting, etc. So really, we're a bit agnostic on sectors and on themes. So really, the big priority is to address infrastructure needs in a sustainable way and an inclusive way. So making sure that even the poorest people of the population have access to good services, improving access to commercial financing for cities. So that's kind of what I was alluding to at the beginning, making sure that the city optimize their funding sources. Traditionally, what we've seen sometimes is a city fund their best project through government funding, and then the really the hardest one, the more complicated one, are left for PPP, and that never works. So we're trying to help change that balance. As a World Bank group, we have quite strict standards on environmental and social risk and governance. So it's also something that we can support cities with, making sure that they have good standards on that. And finally, of course, and we're all here for that, is to promote climate-friendly solutions. So what can we offer? As I mentioned, we are a bit of a one-stop shop, and it's really the solution we're providing to city is kind of unusual for IFC. Traditionally, we work with private sector clients. We just provide a loan. We can provide a little bit of advisory, but not that much. For cities, I think that it has been recognized that for the projects to be implemented well and to have the impact that we want, we have to really bring not only the investment, but also the advisory services to support that and or the PPP solution. And now, more recently, we had the new stream that came up, which is upstream, which is basically the missing middle between what the World Bank does and the IFC does, which is here to help address some bottlenecks in developing projects. So at the highest level, talking to government, doing advocacy, but also sometimes it's about funding some analysis or additional pieces of information or reports or mapping to help us support cities better. So in terms of the investment, we have different products we can use. Traditionally, we've done a lot of direct loans, most of the time unsecured. Now there's an increasing focus on green loans and green bonds, which we're very happy to see. And we can help cities build that framework of the green framework to ensure we're not doing just greenwashing, but it actually has an impact. Of course, we're not only doing this alone, so we're really here to mobilize more capital So we have a syndication team that can also help cities work with us, but also gather as much funding as needed. We can provide guarantees, as I mentioned, to financial intermediary. We work with on blended finance, so with various pots of money to see if there's anything that can help get the project return a bit more interesting, or the project as a whole more interesting, tapping into various funds available. And then the big theme as well is muni bonds. And I think, Gangan, you mentioned that for Indonesia, it's something we're exploring as well. And we here where we usually play a role is we're playing the role of anchor investor. So we bring in, we come in early, we help the city shape it, and then we come in with quite a sizable ticket that gives comfort to other investors. In terms of the other piece, so that's for the financing. In terms of the advisory / upstream support, it's really tailored to the need of the city and or the project. So we have a very big menu of options that we'll be discussing with the city what's more interesting for them. And it ranges from everything from improving credit worthiness. So sometimes we can fund a credit rating, but we can also help with, say, the funding strategy for a city. We help with planning sometimes, project prioritization, diagnostic sector. So for example, when in Ukraine, a city wanted to become a smart city. So we help them with a diagnostic on what that means and what would make more sense for them. And then if there's a specific project in mind, we can also help, of course, with project development support. So helping find the best technology or the business model. As I mentioned, also ENS risk mitigation is a big theme for us. And so it's usually something we also bring in. Or PPP solutions. Organizing competitive tenders, looking at business models. We've done that recently in India, for example, on street lighting, which was very successful. And in addition to that, especially I think for Asia, the subnational lending specifically has also sometimes some legal constraints and regulatory constraints. So we have a big theme on that as well, working with the national government, trying to unlock some of those financing to make that easier. So it could be muni bonds. Sometimes it's just direct lending is not allowed by anyone, which is sometimes, for a country it can make sense, but sometimes it's also about making the case and explaining what can be done. So we're quite busy on that as well, working together with the World Bank. Next slide, please. So this is just a bit more details on the financing. I don't think I'm going to bore you with this, but if there are specific questions, I'm happy to take them later. Next slide. And this is a bit more info on the advisory services we can provide. So as I mentioned, really tailored, quite varied depending on the project and the sectors. The one thing that's not on the slide but could be interesting for this audience is the fact that, especially for climate, we have developed a tool called Apex, which is an online tool, which basically assesses the carbon footprint of a city. And the cool thing about that tool is you could play around with it and see the impact of whether, for example, if you found, 100 clean buses, the impact it has on your carbon footprint. So it really helps a city figure out what's the biggest kind of bang for the buck in a way, where, what's the investment that's really needed that will really help them reduce the carbon emission. And sometimes it's not what you expect. And the idea is to then use that tool to develop a bit of a roadmap that we can then discuss in terms of financing pipeline. So a bit, I think, what Rohit, you are doing for renewable energy, but this is more on the transport, waste, water, and buildings for a city. So it's something we're developing, and it's ramping up quite quickly. Yes, please, next slide. Sorry. So just an example very quickly. It's the city of Izmir in Turkey. And here I think the point I want to convey is really where I think, Hester, you mentioned that sometimes investors are here for the short term and they have very strict returns. In IFC, it's the opposite. We're here for the long term, and the longer term, the better. And we're here to build a long-term relationship with a city. And it's worked out really well for the city of Izmir, for example, where we started with a rather small investment in 2010, 20 million, which was a port expansion. And then, as you can see on the timeline, we've done repeat investments with them, everything ranging from, I think, over 100 million to 65 million, various sectors. And now really we're at the point where, we're a bit of a sounding board for the city. Every time they want to do something or they're thinking of something, they come to us and we can find the best partner or help them design that. So that had a really interesting impact on them, on their financing first, because the diversification of finance was pretty striking. When we first, I think a decade ago, they were only having 30% of their funding coming from international sources. Now it's 75%. But also in terms of CO2 emissions and water services, it had some quite interesting impact. And so the most recent support we've done was a COVID-19 support, just to help them bridge the financing gap on that. I think I'll stop here. I'm happy to take more questions, and I'll give the floor back to you, Esther.
Yeah, thank you so much to you and to all the panelists. I would really now like to move to the question and answer session. So here we already received some questions in the question box. Actually, Laura, it's addressed to you, but I believe the question is relevant maybe also to other panelists. So I will read it out, and I invite actually all the panelists to answer, but particularly then you, Laura. So banks are always interested to finance in profitable businesses. How to encourage banks in green financing?
Great. So maybe I can start, and then others can also contribute to that. So it's a very relevant question, but I think the first thing that we need to do is to change the narrative that green is not profitable. And this may have been true in the past, but it is no longer the case. So investing in green infrastructure, especially in sectors such as energy and transport, can be just as profitable. I think what we explored here in this session were a few of the challenges that we see there. For instance, one of the things that we talked about was project preparation. So many projects are financially viable, but they need to be prepared properly. And that's exactly the role of project preparation, is to closing the gap and being able to develop bankable projects and to be able to access capital that is available here. So I think there is a very strong role that cities are doing right now, which is to preparing climate action plans, aligning those with their own budget planning, and also then looking into opportunities to prepare these projects, be it on their own or also with the support of project preparation facilities, to then be able to access capital. And then there's also, I think there's a role of in projects that are either in sectors that are still, there isn't that much certainty about the viability, is to have concessional capital to try to reduce this uncertainty or this risk, especially when you're talking about an innovative model or something that hasn't been done either in a specific tool or in that specific region. So I think there's a big role there to play in terms of institutions that are offering concessional capital in the blended model. But then I think, just to finalize and to hand it over to others, I think that in some cases there is also a role for regulation to play to help change the incentives. And this is why even if the contributions to COP are voluntary, still they send a very strong message in terms of where the economy is heading to. And I think that again there, as we need to, and I think all of us here are to some extent working in that, and reducing the distance between the local and the cities and the national governments, because then again, national governments can send very strong signs through their action to the financial sector as well. But let me stop here and keen to hear from others as well. Thank you, Esther.
Yeah, many thanks, Laura. Yeah, we are receiving more and more questions, and as time is pressing, if someone wants to reflect to the question Laura just answered, I can give the opportunity to one panelist, but if not, then I would like to move on with the question.
If I may, Esther. Okay, from my point of view, based on the Indonesian experience, it is also important to set up in national political level. So National Financial Authority in Indonesia developed a sustainable financing roadmap. So that it can give the non-financial benefit to the bank. In addition, I agree with Rola that it is related to the cost of fund. So if we have a very low cost of the bank has a very low cost of fund, so they have more potential to provide financial support for this green project, because usually they consider it is as a high risk project based on their due diligence process. And the last one, maybe it is also need to provide the guarantee facility in order to guarantee the risk of the bank in providing support financially to the project. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to move to the next question, which was directed to you, Aurélie, asking, will the IFC advisory service provide support to help private enterprise building to business plan for building for public bike sharing scheme in megacity?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Hester. So I think quick answer is yes, but we'll have to make sure also that it's aligned with what the city wants to do, and that they're also the kind of, if there's bidding, it's going to be transparent and the procurement processes are going to be followed properly. But yes, I think we'll be keen to we'll be happy to discuss that if there's an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The next question, I think it's to any of you to pick it up. What role do you see universities, technical colleagues, and other institutions playing in reshaping the role of business in decarbonized society and region? Who would like to take that question?
I can start maybe. Yeah. So very quickly. So I think there's different angles to that question. So first, maybe the simplest option is first making sure that their buildings are green. We're seeing a lot of universities and colleges that are not green, or and that's like a starting point, right? Like you can have an influence on that. That's easy, and then you kind of you help build that agenda. Second, I think educating people in that business. I think we'll definitely need more engineers, more people who are knowledgeable about this, about finance. And I see there's lots of interest on sustainable finance, for example. So I would think that's really a big priority, and it's great to see more and more interest there. And finally, I think on advocacy, right? I think the more people advocate for it, the more things are going to change. Simple things, for example, we're seeing on the waste side, since I think we mentioned that, just segregation is not there in most of the countries in Asia, and that's really preventing good waste solutions to happen, right? You can't really do some pointed waste solutions if all your trash is kind of is merged in one. So just simple things and just starting somewhere and developing that and advocacy is really critical, I would think.
Esther, just if I may just add a point to that.
Yes.
I mean, from my perspective, the way I see it, even in my work, I think universities, technical colleges, research institutes, they're all part of the community, they're part of the city, they're part of the region, and they actually play a very important role. So their participation is key to the transition that the city or the region would make with the government's lead. And we are talking about looking at the future based on today's technologies, today's mechanisms, today's strategies. What happens in 2030? What new technology comes out in 2040? How cryptocurrency on the finance side changes the playing field? We don't know. And that is where the universities, the colleges, and the research institutes, from technology to the finance sides and management, plays a big role to come out and see how these new mechanisms and instruments play a key role in changing, or let's say in advancing or speeding up the transition. Just my one point on that. Thank you.
And if I may quickly add to that as well, one of the challenges that we had during the State of Cities report is data availability. And as much as we know that there's a lot of we need the financial institutions to have this data available, there's also a big role, I think, for universities and research institutions to play to help us improve the methodologies that exist for tracking finance. So I think there's this big role that they can play. And I think there's one more point, which is when I was studying, I really wanted to do a course on sustainable finance when I was in university, and there was no such thing. And I think now I've seen more and more coming up, which is great. So I think there is a role for academia to play into making sustainability as part of mainstream curricula there, and changing the way that people perceive finance and economics and incentives. So yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. We are receiving more and more questions, so let me also read the next one. What are the potentials for urban climate financing in small island states? Maybe orally, this is again a question to you first, but obviously inviting also the others if they want to contribute.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the views of others, because it's really a nut we haven't cracked yet. We'd love to do more in the Pacific, for example, and especially on waste. We looked at the aggregation of waste through various islands and seeing if that makes sense. But for on the returns and on the business model, we haven't yet found the perfect model. Not that we're not trying, but we're seeing some good ideas now. I think the costs of the waste solutions are coming down. But yeah, that's one that we're really trying to do more on. So I'll be very curious to hear what the other panelists are thinking.
Anyone would like to add on that from our panel? If not, then I would like then to move to the next question. I'm so happy we are receiving so many questions. I myself would have so many, but I really would like to hear our audience first, and time is pressing. So the next question was with regard to renewable energy transition, how efficient are these at the practical level? What are key challenges at ground level for its successful implementation? I believe, Rohit, maybe it's to you, but obviously, again, I also see Mr. Kim, please come in. I see you raise your hand.
Rohit, would you like to go, or would it be fine if I go?
No, please go ahead. I can add it after you.
Yes, yeah. Yes. Actually, yeah, I also had a related question to you. I think this question relates to the green investment question that was, I think, the first question of the session today. We do a lot of work with financial institutions here, and what they say, what we hear from them, especially with investments in Southeast Asia, which is a very important investment destination for our financial sector, is that they would be more than willing to do renewable investments in Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Vietnam. But the reality is that the pricing packages available to renewable projects in Indonesia, for example, are not financeable. Whereas the packages available, the power purchase agreements, etc., packages available for coal power plants are just so good that they just can't skip. That's why our government invested several billions of dollars of money into building new coal power plants in Indonesia and Vietnam in 2020 last year, just in 2020 last year, which is very sad. This kind of means that there is a problem with, I mean, it's not just about a finance money issue, but also a problem of doing capacity building in those regions that need investments. This kind of relates to my question to Rohit. I mean, 100% renewables at a subnational level is good, but what happens here with, for example, not multinationals, but multinationals like Samsung, they would like to be 100% renewables in Korea, but they can't, because they can only buy power from one company, and that's nationally owned utility, and they have all kinds of power sources, coal, nuclear, and gas inside their portfolio. So, and unless the direct purchase is allowed, it's gonna become a business risk to them, because a lot of their suppliers are requesting to go 100% renewables. So I think the similar question comes into the 100% renewable questions in some national at city level. I mean, if many of the governments that, especially the emerging economies, if they're reliant on just able to power from, I would say, their state-owned utilities, I mean, what are what it's going to do. I mean, unless Indonesia is going to be out of coal probably by 2060, unless we're at 2060, there may be difficulties in doing that. So I would like to hear, I wanted to hear your thoughts on that one. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. There's so many points in there. You know, it's not one simple question, and answering it directly, it's not that easy either with the constraint of time. But nevertheless, yes, it is important. I mean, from where I see today, most of the nations going and committing to net zero targets, and where 100% renewables, if not becomes an important stepping stone, if not like a corner pillar, you know, central pillar based on which you would look at achieving those targets. Now, when nations commit to such goals, how do you see them fulfilling such targets, including NDCs, SDGs? There would be a bottom-up approach, and that's where some national, local, regional governments play an important role. Now, once they achieve this through their climate action plans, energy action plans, it becomes much easier to comprehend the same at the national level goals. As far as you mentioned, with Indonesia as an example, I mean, and it is not just Indonesia, of course, the story is similar in many other countries as well. At the moment, there is a lot of politics involved, a lot of individual interests involved. I mean, if you look at Indonesia, for example, the number of players that dominate the transmission, the distribution, in fact, the generation, sometimes there are monopolies going on. And those are beyond, you know, the fact whether coal is more financeable or renewable energy is more financeable. There are business assets on the ground which needs to be turning profitable, or at least to recover the money invested for a period of time, compared to some new investments being made. So those factors are there, but nevertheless, there's also a lack of you know, let's say, information or the correct detail that needs to be made available to those decision makers, that shows that, you know, renewable energy is financeable, is affordable, and can be invested upon. The correct policy scenario needs to be also made. So why don't I see, I mean, now a carbon tax came out in Indonesia. Why was this not there before? Now, which it came out, perhaps that makes that one stronger step forward to make renewable energy investment friendly, or the one that international private investors would look at. So there are many factors that once you start, when you go on the ground, you realize that the stakeholders, the players invested in it, and it is not just the data, the resource, these are of course there, but when you start implementing it, there are so many other challenges, bottlenecks, bureaucracies. Those need to be ironed out, and once that is done, it is but obvious that the renewable energy would be the you know, the number one priority, because it doesn't cost on the fuel side at all. Whereas coal, which is you know, maybe Indonesia is sitting on a pile of coal. That could be a reason, for example. No? So these influences are there, which you know, need to be talked around. There needs to be global agenda and pressure, and so on. As far as the technologies are concerned, this is also something that needs to happen. There needs to be more, you know, because I think the question that Esther asked was also focused on technology. So looking at technologies that are commercially available at the local country, because for example, Indonesia is sitting on a big resource of geothermal, but they are not yet there with the technology available that is there in Europe, for example. So they would look at getting technology from Europe or other countries that are you know, more efficient, more commercialized with geothermal technologies. But then that would make it more expensive for them. So there definitely needs to be seen into this technology side. There needs to be seen into policy side, and the whole environment, to make sure that renewable energy, you know, investment oriented scenario is created, is something very important. So all the points that you mentioned are true. But nevertheless, it's not that it cannot be worked around, because every city, every region, every country will have its own you know, contours and points that needs to be handled locally. But nevertheless, the aim or the path or the road towards the transition is possible. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rohit, for this powerful and positive words. We are slightly behind time, but I hope you still have like 5 minutes to stay. So I would have just one very last question to all the panelists, and I really would like you to answer just with one word. And after that, I will hand it over back to the Secretariat. I believe they also want to take a group photo. So I ask you to stay with us for 5 more minutes. And so my question would be very quick, as this whole session is focusing on fund mobilization for subnational climate action. During this session, you mentioned so many things. We were talking about the importance of project preparation, the multi-level governance. We mentioned different financing instruments. We were speaking about risk mitigation, creditworthiness, capacity building, enabling environment, and so on. So if you just would pick one, what would be the one you would say you see the most critical for mobilizing subnational climate finance and make these funds accessible for local governments? So maybe, Rohit, if you would like to start, and then the others.
From my side, I would say empowering local governments. So more policies indirected that, local governments are able to do their bit towards climate mitigation, climate adaptation, and resilience. Thank you.
Laura, what would be your word or sentence?
Be closing the gap with national governments. I think national governments have a big role to play into scaling up climate finance for cities.
Thank you so much. Aurélie?
I think I kind of agree with what has been said, but also I think for the cities to really leverage what's available as a support. So, be it through MLAs or all the different funds, etc. I think there's lots of things of people who can support them. I know it's confusing sometimes, and I was really happy to hear about the Green Finance Directory that Laura mentioned. So just leveraging those more and ask for support when needed.
Thank you so much. Mr. Kim?
Well, as not a total expert on this area, but I think there is a lot of potential of bilateral financing because, as I mentioned before, there is a lot of appetite for providing financial assistance on these matters in my country as well.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Mr. Dirgantapara?
For me, it's a financial ecosystem. So I think it's not only the regulation, but also the another factors which is related to this for allowing the green financing happen in country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would really like to thank to all the panelists for the great presentations, the audience for the questions, and to be here today. And with that, I would like to hand it back to my colleague, Soumya. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Esther. That was excellent. And thanks to all the panelists. I think diverse viewpoints on the same topic, and the discussions were enriching. A lot of information in there for the cities and the subnational authorities who are listening to this session. And I think the point that Aurélie had, when we do these sessions, there are so many resources that are put out by partners, by multilateral entities, by bilateral programs, and different entities such as the CCFLA, I think, and programs like Ghana is involved in Indonesia. I think reaching out to these different programs, and as Italy, as a local government authority, we are there to support the subnational entities to reach out to these different facilities that are out there for the provincial governments, for the subnational governments. And I would encourage everybody in the audience, if you haven't asked, if there is any of these topics, anything related to sustainable development, climate finance, that is a requirement, be it, structuring of a financial project, or finding viability gap financing, or even a business model that would make your proposition viable. So all of this is support that the group here, which is here today, is able to help you with, and access it. And I thank all of you, all the partners here today who took your time to be with us. May I now request all the participants, if you could turn on your video cameras, we would like to get a group photo, if that's okay with all. And I would encourage my colleagues to allow them to turn on their videos. So
only panelists can do that.
or is it? So the participants can't?
They can only talk.
Oh, I see. Apologies for that. All right, then I hope you got our group photo, or do we do 1, 2, 3 now? We'll still do that. So 1, 2, and 3. Big smile, please. Perfect. Thanks a lot. Thank you for your time, and a big thank you to all the audience for being with us here today. The Asia-Led Partnership Forum would be back next week on Tuesday, and next Thursday again, which would be the 31st of August, and again on the 2nd of September. So our next sessions are on the 31st of August and the 2nd of September, focusing on long-term low-emission development strategies and green recovery, and the linkage between long-term LEDs and NDCs. And we hope to see some or all of you there again. So thank you very much and have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. Thanks.